economy at the University of Sydney. I'll be chairing this meeting on behalf of the University of Sydney Casuals Network. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're all meeting today on stolen land. In particular, I'm here on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I want to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. The purpose of this meeting is to reiterate the need to radically transform our universities, which at present are colonial institutions of privilege that were built on land stolen from Aboriginal people. So it's necessary when we imagine a good university and organise to build a different kind of higher education system that first among our considerations is justice and sovereignty for First Nations people. So our speakers from the University of Sydney Casuals Network are going to be presenting findings from a recent survey of casualised staff in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at the University of Sydney. And the results really indicate that COVID has deepened the existing crisis in higher education, and it's the most precariously employed university workers who are bearing the brunt of this. We're then going to hear from a representative of the Casuals Network at the University of New South Wales, Dr Kynan Tan, a permanent staff member from the University of Sydney, Professor Dany Celermajer, the author of The Good University, Professor Raewyn Connell, and finally from Dr Robert Boncardo from the University of Sydney Casuals Network, who's going to provide a summary of the meeting. We'll have some time, hopefully, at the end, at least 10 minutes for questions and an open discussion, and we'll be finishing up at 1 p.m. So this meeting is also being recorded, and I want everyone to feel free to ask questions and contribute in the chat. So it's my pleasure to introduce Nick, Lucy and Joel from the University of Sydney Casuals Network. Nick is a PhD candidate and sessional tutor in the School of Languages and Cultures. Lucy is a PhD candidate and sessional tutor in the Department of Philosophy, and Joel is a PhD candidate and tutor in the Department of Political Economy, and they're going to present the findings of the survey to us. Thanks, guys.
Thanks everyone for attending this meeting. Today my co-authors and I will present the findings of our recent survey. The survey conducted in June was designed to obtain a more detailed understanding of the working conditions of the faculty's casual staff amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. I will start by presenting an overview of the qualitative and quantitative data from the survey. Joel will next present the survey's recommendations and outline the risks to the university of not following these. Nick will be later available to answer any questions you have about the survey. In total, we received 159 responses from casual staff in the faculty. These respondents were invited to select as many roles as applied to them. Out of this, 91.2% were tutors, 40.9% lecturers, and 27% unit coordinators. This demonstrates that casual staff were simultaneously undertaking multiple teaching roles at the university. In addition to this, 45.3% of respondents were PhD or Masters by Research candidates, reflecting the importance of casual work in providing financial support and career development opportunities to the next generation of academics. The survey results are reflective of long-term casualisation within the faculty. 66% of casuals stated they had been employed at the university for more than 3 years, while 75.5% were employed in the higher education sector for over 3 years. This suggests a lack of opportunity to convert to permanent employment. The survey reveals systematic underpayment of casual staff in the faculty. While such wage theft predated the COVID-19 pandemic, it has been greatly exacerbated by the rapid transition to online learning necessitated. Staff were required to take courses online within days, For casual staff in the faculty, this led to a dramatic increase in unpaid work hours. Survey respondents stated they were forced to engage in unpaid work to adapt courses to online learning and effectively support students in the transition to an unfamiliar form of education. In addition, the survey findings point to a substantial role for casual staff, and particularly tutors, in providing unpaid pastoral care to students, care which these students did not find offered elsewhere. The survey data revealed that casual workers completed on average 50.58 unpaid work hours over semester 1, 1/3 of the average number of hours for which a casual academic is contracted. 78.6% of survey respondents stated they had completed unpaid work prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, while 74.8% of respondents specified this unpaid work increased still further during the pandemic. The average number of unpaid work hours per week was between 4 and 10, with 56.8% of survey respondents signalling their unpaid work fell into this range. This is comparable to a recent UNSW survey in which respondents specified their unpaid work hours fell into the same range of between 4 to 10 hours. One respondent notably mentioned receiving a take-home hourly pay of just $8 per hour on average. In addition to many hours of unpaid work to effectively facilitate the transition to online learning, survey respondents were left out of pocket for the substantial costs of moving teaching online for the university. 84.9% of respondents stated they had incurred additional expenses during semester 1. The top 3 costs were electricity, internet and data, and the purchase of technological equipment. Multiple respondents mentioned additional costs in excess of $2,000. As we can see in the quote, one respondent alluded to electricity bills through the roof, more than double the usual amount. The university has failed to compensate casual staff for these additional costs of running the university from home. The survey reveals the devastating impact of university management's austerity agenda upon the faculty's casualised workforce. The survey findings speak to the very real human impact of the university's cuts to casual jobs and units of study. 98.7% of survey respondents cited work and employment concerns. 86.1% stated they were stressed or highly stressed that they might lose their employment. 33.9% specified they had already experienced some sort of job loss, contract loss, or reduction in hours during semester 1. Were we to repeat this survey today, the results would likely be even more troubling, with casual staff now starting to find out definitively that there is no work for them next semester. The survey results suggest the University of Sydney risks a lost generation of its own academics. In particular, the sudden loss of casual employment opportunities is forcing current higher degree research candidates and early career academics to look beyond the higher education sector. 71.1% of survey respondents revealed they are highly concerned that COVID-19 austerity measures will have a long-lasting negative impact on their career development. 59.7% said they were likely to leave academia permanently should they lose their job at the university. As we can see in the top quote, one respondent alluded to the fact that losing their job would not only lead to the loss of their career, but would culminate in forcing them to leave the country. As well as articulating personal fears about impacts upon their own career development, respondents also voiced broader fears about the impacts of the loss of dedicated teaching staff upon the quality of student education, as well as the devastating impacts of a widespread loss of skill and talent upon the higher education and research sector. I will now pass to my co-author Joel, who will present the survey's recommendations.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for that wonderful, if harrowing presentation. So we've made a number of recommendations that we gained from the data. I think there will be some pearl clutching, as ever, over the feasibility of these recommendations, but just have a look at them and be aware that these are actually quite conservative. There is nothing remotely radical about what we're proposing. The first recommendation is to reimburse the additional costs of online and remote teaching, because crazy as it seems, our homes are not spaces of industry. They are not set up to run the university, the business of the university, but that's precisely what's happened. As we've noted, we've had to pay electricity, but we've also had to pay to basically set up our homes to become offices. 2, reverse all projected units of study and casual job cuts. If we want students at the university, we're going to need units to teach them. And if you have the units to teach them, you're going to need the staff to teach it. We're sick of this euphemistic resting of units. They are cutting the units and they need to reverse those cuts. The third, now brace yourselves for this extremely radical claim that was taken straight out of the Communist Manifesto, to pay the work that we have performed. I'm really sick of arguing this. We must be paid for the work that we have performed. This includes the unremunerated labour that we performed in semester 1, but also the years of exploitation that we've been suffering. And we've been repeatedly told that it's not possible to challenge this, that it's not possible to find it, when half of our survey respondents showed that they've kept meticulous records of this unremunerated labour. And in conversations with our colleagues and comrades from all over the country, we're seeing that many universities are actually beginning to challenge this. And UNSW has effectively challenged this wage theft. And their management, seeing the writing on the wall, decided to settle this out of court. 4, review the process of conversion to fixed and permanent contracts for casual workers. So there is a clause in the EBA, clauses 67 to 69, which was lauded in front of us, telling us that that it's so easy to convert these people who've been working for some time to a fixed term contract. But from our respondents, that's just not the reality. We've got people in our group who have been working as casuals for 10 years. And one woman that I spoke to from the conservatorium, 20 years a casual. That is unacceptable. And it shows that these clauses are a complete failure. They need to be reviewed and they need to be made effective. 5, review the pay and conditions of the university's highest paid staff. At the time of writing this, 28 out of 41 of the country's vice chancellors had actually agreed to a salary reduction, with 17% of these committing to a 20% pay reduction, but not our VC, not our dean, not our finance director. When they were charged with the poverty that they've thrust us into, our finance director had the gall to talk about how difficult it's been to get financing for his future investment properties. Anna Marie Jagos had the nerve to talk about the magnanimity of management opting not to give themselves a pay rise. And Spence, when I asked him point blank, will he commit to sacrificing some of his salary, he literally laughed it off and said no. No, was his response. How long do we have to keep this charade up? How long do we have to pretend that these people have the university's interests at heart? They don't. They're usurpers. They've failed the test of leadership and they have shown that they are hostile to the interests of the university. So there are some risks. Despite the amazing savings of $1 million, there are some serious costs to cutting the casualised staff. So the risks, sorry, if we could just go to the next slide. So the risks I'll just briefly talk about. I think some of these are quite obvious. Firstly, the significant decrease in university ranking, which is related to the second, reduced quality of teaching and research output. Much of our scores that we get are the result of the outstanding quality and expertise that casual staff provide for the university. We're the ones who face the students. We're the ones who get the good marks. That university ranking will plummet when you get rid of us. 3, the increased stress and workload for permanent staff. Many of you are already very much under the pump. When I first entered academia, I was a little bit incredulous at how much nonsense administrative work that you have to do. And this has only been increasing in the 4 years that I've been teaching, and it's going to get a whole lot worse. 4, reduced diversity of course offerings. Again, this is a no-brainer. If there aren't courses on offer, then there's a reduced diversity of course offerings. And if you have a look at the courses that are slated to be cut, they're just coincidentally the courses that are most critical of the ideology that drives this austerity. 5 are the negative macroeconomic impacts. With Australia's tertiary sector being the 3rd largest export, somehow it's sound economic sense to completely tank this and to add thousands of highly skilled professionals to the historic levels of rising unemployment. And finally, 6, the detrimental impact of Australia's research capacity and future. Much apart from what management keep telling us about putting us in a stronger position, they have exposed us to serious weakness. The only strength that we will be moving to is the strength of management to further decimate the university. That's what they're talking about, and we need to stop them. We need to say enough is enough and move to a democratic workplace and a good university. Thank you.
Thanks very much to our speakers for presenting those damning findings and for all the work that went into that survey. Before I introduce our next speaker, I'll just like to let you know that the Casuals Network is running an organising meeting for precarious and permanent staff next Thursday, July 16th. At 1 p.m. So if you're a University of Sydney staff member and you'd like to be involved in planning the next steps to restore units of study and casual jobs, please put your email addresses in the chat now and we'll send you a Zoom invite. One thing we'll be discussing at this meeting is the possibility of there being unnecessary expenditure in the faculty that could be cut instead of, the core teaching talent. Yeah, please get along to that meeting if you can. We've also got a questionnaire that's been posted in the chat to help us get a sense of where scope is for scaling back unnecessary or excessive costs in the faculty. I'd also like now to introduce Dr Kynan Tan. Kynan is an artist and researcher based on Wangal and Gadigal land. Kynan completed his PhD studies in 2018 at the UNSW Art and Design and was awarded a Dean's Award for Outstanding PhD Theses. His artworks have been shown at the Beijing Central Academy of Fine Art, Museum of Contemporary Art Sydney, Art Gallery of South Australia and Perth Institute of Contemporary Art. Kynan is a member of the UNSW Casuals Network and the National Higher Education Action Network. Kynan is currently working on a part-time fixed-term research contract at UNSW Art and Design. So welcome, Kynan.
Thanks, Tash. And thanks very much to Joel and Lucy for that presentation. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm speaking from stolen Aboriginal land. So thanks very much to the Sydney University Casuals Network for inviting me. I take great inspiration from your organisation and resilience, and I look forward to working together more in the future. So today I'll be referring to casuals or casualised workers, but I'd like to point out that this includes precarious, fixed term and unemployed workers who are also part of our workforce. So I'm here today on behalf of the UNSW Casuals Network. We published a survey report of casualised workers in April of this year, near the beginning of COVID impacts. Our report shows the ongoing exploitation of casualised workers and the state of anxiety and stress that many workers were in due to the ongoing crisis. We found that many casualised workers have been in precarious employment for many years, that the majority had demands placed on them additional to their contracted workloads, that they were committed to providing ongoing support to students in distress, and that many feared losing their jobs and were expecting to have to leave university work altogether. Reading the Fast Casuals report, I was struck by the fact that I wasn't at all surprised. This is even though many of the findings are confronting and even harrowing, some more so than what we found at UNSW. I wasn't surprised because I know from talking to casualised workers that this exploitation occurs constantly and that it is built into the current university system. To give some sense of how big an issue precarious work is, in 2018, the NTEU found that only 35% of university workers have secure employment. Casual workers provide over 85% of teaching work across the country, and nearly 40% of professional work. Here, I want to talk about one key point, which is the potential mass exodus of casualised workers from universities. As shown in these surveys, we find ourselves in a situation where there is the compounding issues of not being given contracts, reduction in teaching hours and courses, increased unpaid teaching workloads, increased class sizes, and additional expenses of working from home, along with the lack of opportunities for secure employment. Casualised workers do this work because we value it, because we care deeply for teaching and research, and because we have been told that we should be doing this work and that it will lead on to better things. But as the situation continues to worsen, and with casualised workers being discarded by university managements, casualised workers will leave universities en masse. What kind of university will we have when we lose this enormous wealth of skills and training? When we lose many of the workers who currently do 85% of the teaching? Without this work, the university would simply not be able to run. Yet, precarious workers are given the bare minimum of care and concern by the university. We need to look at how universities are managed by an executive class who deal with every issue as corporations rather than as public, not-for-profit institutions. In a recent email from UNSW management, the Vice-Chancellor wrote that savings made by reductions in casual staff came under the heading of non-people expenditure and expenditure that varies with student load. Yet we know that enrolment numbers are similar to previous semesters and that there is still lots of work to be done. The treatment of casuals as merely a budget line has to end. Precarious workers demand to be treated with the same rights as other university workers, and for these incredibly wealthy institutions to provide adequate support, payment, and certainty about ongoing work. The current crisis that casualised staff face, with many jobs cut already, is a product of universities' ongoing and increasing reliance on these workers as a source of cheap, exploitable, and expendable labour. We must ensure that more permanent and ongoing positions are created and that casualised workers have clear pathways into secure jobs. To do this, I think we need more actions like what we are seeing from the USyd Casuals Network, grassroots organising, working within the NTU to seriously fight in these campaigns, and joining our networks together for national strength. We need to be active and organised and stand together in solidarity to fight for a better public education system. One way we can do this is through groups like the National Higher Education Action Network, who are calling for a National University Staff Assembly on August 4th to fight for public education by taking actions up to and including strikes. We need to build broad solidarity for this cause, and every meeting, conversation, and action is important. I believe the only way towards just public education and equal rights for all university workers is to listen to casualised workers and join them in the fight for better universities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kynan. That was very well put. I couldn't agree more. Just in the interest of time, I'll keep us moving along, but really enjoying the discussions we're having in the chat. I'd now like to introduce Professor Dany Celermajer. Dany is an activist scholar and currently Professor of Sociology at the University of Sydney. Her work has principally been concerned with understanding the structural underpinnings of human rights violations and developing interventions to shift those underlying dynamics. Recognising the arbitrariness of where she had drawn the boundaries of her own work on justice and violence, she now works at the interface of human, environmental, and animal justice and ethics. So welcome, Dany.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I want to acknowledge that I'm on Dharawal land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging who have and who continue to sustain the conditions of all of our lives. I want to very much thank the organisers for all of the ongoing work and acknowledge all of the work that everyone is doing under conditions of stress, which makes it difficult to continue to build solidarity. So what I wanted to do in my brief comments was to locate the casuals struggle and the campaign within some of the broader coordinates of contemporary social injustice. And at the same time, that's the kind of negative story. More positively, just make a few comments about how we might locate the stakes of this particular fight within broader aspirations that we might want to articulate for the role of the university within a broader social and political context of crisis, environmental crisis and political crisis. So first, on the justice question, the speakers so far have already articulated really beautifully a number of the ways in which the claims are core claims of justice. First, in the obvious sense around whether casuals retain jobs, and if so, the conditions under which you work. The questions of distribution of university resources, the choices that management is currently making, has made in the past that have brought us to this situation. And that's a core, who benefits from those choices and how those choices reflective of existing power hierarchies rather than the type of democracy that we would want the university to be prefiguring. And then there's the matter that that people have spoken about of exploitation, obviously the continuing exploitation and abuse of power of unpaid labour, both the types of labour that gets acknowledged, but also the emotional labour that people have been doing, particularly in the last 6 months, but under the long term. Permanents are aware that really we wouldn't have been able to make the transition to online learning if it hadn't been for the skill set of casuals. It's not just unjust, but I think there's something really obscene about keeping people on board long enough to keep the ship afloat and then throwing them off board as soon as you're able to keep float, which is, I think, what is going on now in the shift between semester 1 and semester 2. But there's a further injustice that I think is really important to name. And I'm going to borrow from the world of environmental and climate justice to talk about intergenerational injustice. There's no doubt in my mind that the conditions under which many permanent academics obtained and retained permanency were very different to the conditions under which young academics are seeking to get some sort of stability, permanency, and the conditions in which you can flourish in your career and in your creativity. I'm really not being falsely modest when I say that had I been applying for a permanent position with what I had when I came out of my PhD, I wouldn't even have got an interview. In other words, the disparity between the security and the insecurity that's facing as a result of the status is of a disparity in merit or effort. Those two great justifications of difference that liberal theories of justice like to accept. It's a reflection of shifts in the labour market. It's structural. And most importantly, from the point of view of justice, it's completely arbitrary. So as someone who occupies an unmerited privilege, it seems to me that there is an obligation of solidarity. Anyone who tells themselves that we are better off because we deserve to be is buying into a self-serving myth, the myth of meritocracy, which really, I think, needs to be named, and that myth of meritocracy is sustaining intergenerational injustice. If we're going to be concerned about intergenerational justice in relation to the environment, we need to bring the same discourse here. So for all those reasons, it seems to me that any fair-minded person at the university ought to recognise the case for addressing both the acute and the chronic insecurity and exploitation as a matter of justice for something that we're all committed to for the type of university that we want to be in. So then moving to the more positive case, what sort of university do we want this to be? When Nat first asked me to speak, she suggested that I might speak about the impact that the exploitation and the loss of casual work is having on, and is going to have on permanent staff. And I understand that that's a concern, but for me, that's just replicating the neo-feudal situation that we've got. It shouldn't be a matter that casuals get permanents can do the more glorifying research work. What sort of university do we want? Do we want to be prefiguring the type of egalitarian, creative, democratic society that we're working for in our research and our teaching? Or do we want to be replicating a type of neo-feudal structure, which is not just happening in relation to permanents and casuals, but it's also happening in relation to the funding structure, where some people are on teaching-only contracts, some people are on research-only contracts. We're creating a type of environment within the university that I think is not only deleterious to the people who are at the bottom of that hierarchy, but is deeply corrosive of the type of culture that we want to be creating at the university. What sort of authentic collaborations do we want to create right across the diversity of skill sets at the university? And what sort of structure of employment do we need if we're going to be able to do that? And do we want the university to prefigure the type of respectful, creative community that we want to nourish more broadly? Now, I understand that those sort of big aspirational questions can sometimes be put aside when you're under conditions of crisis and you just think like, all we want to do is survive. And that, you know, that kind of combination of long-term and short-term is something that needs to be carefully thought about. At the same time, unless I think we locate this particular struggle within a broader vision, we can see what's happening to the university sector. We can see the type of political choices that are being made. Let's spend money on long-range missiles and gas instead of spending money on nurturing the type of civil society and community of diversity that is actually going to sustain us through the type of political and environmental crises that we're heading into. I think it's very important for our own souls and for nurturing the struggle to really locate what's happening here within that. So I really thank you for giving me a little bit of space to share those ideas. And I feel very honoured to be in any way part of the broader movement.
Thank you so much, Dany. That was really wonderful and so well said. We've got two more speakers, and we're now going to hear from Professor Raewyn Connell, who is one of Australia's leading social scientists. Her work spans the sociology of neoliberalism, gender, and higher education. The author of 11 books since the turn of the century, Professor Connell currently holds a university chair at the University of Sydney and has previously held visiting chairs in a number of universities across the world, including at Harvard. She is the author of The Good University, What Universities Actually Do and Why It's Time for Radical Change. So I'm really honoured to welcome her to speak.
Of Sydney University are living on stolen land as a result of the displacement of all the Darug-speaking communities who were here at the time the British invasion began. And that is actually an important issue about the kind of university system we might want for the future. Thank you to the Casuals Network for inviting me to this discussion. I've read the survey report. I've also read the one from the University of New South Wales. And I very much encourage everyone here, if you haven't read those reports yet, please do so. They are really significant, and especially read the qualitative material in them. All of us will know a group of people who are affected by the situation of casualisation. But what these surveys show is how much this is a systemic issue, something that is across the whole institution, the whole set of institutions. And it shows, I think, the different kinds of toxicity that casualised staff have to put up with, the rising stress, the damage to careers, sometimes clearly career-ending damage, and what I found particularly illuminating, the evidence of the different kinds of exploitation of casualised staff, the sheer cost that people have had to pay out of their own pocket to be part of the shifting of teaching online, the wage theft, the amount of unpaid labour that is doing. These are, I think, really important. And they obviously pose the question, how the hell did we get to this situation? How did this happen? That institutions which have a kind of benign pro-social purpose are treating people in this devastating way. Well, I think in a way, and I'm not the first person in this discussion to say it, this has been coming for quite a while. In the book, The Good University, I argue that universities, and this is worldwide, not just in Australia, have been heading for a sustainability crisis of organisational sustainability, in which the insecurity of staff is quite a large part. And I think the impact of the COVID-19 epidemic has really focused these problems rather than caused new ones. But if you look through the recent history of the Australian system, you can see several things that have really enabled this to happen. One is toxic policies at the government level, the shift to a fee-funded or partly fee-funded system 30 years ago, increasingly driven by fees, which has helped the redefinition of universities from cooperative parts of the public sector to competitive firms battling against each other for advantage. And the attitude, which is very, very clearly expressed in the latest federal policy statement that came out just a couple of weeks ago, the Job Ready Graduates document, that what universities are basically for is to be job training centres and nothing much else. Now, not all of the Conservatives believe that or have believed that in the past, but that seems to be front and centre at the moment. So that's a changed policy environment, but the universities have also changed internally with the quite dramatic rise of managerial power over that 30-year span. Change in governing bodies from largely public sector to bodies, many of which are simply dominated by business representatives, and the decline of the various means within universities to exercise some degree of industrial democracy, which a generation ago were present. I mean, I don't believe in a golden age. There's never been a time when we didn't have to struggle to make universities just. But there have been changes for the worst over this period. And thirdly, I think there's the bystander problem. The fact that many staff in more secure positions have not taken very much notice of what was happening to the casualised or outsourced staff. Politicians of all parties have stood by while these developments ramped up. There are many bystanders around who are also, I think, part of the problem. It's easy to see the vice chancellors as some kind of Voldemort, some principle of evil. Well, I know a number of vice chancellors, and they're nice people. They love dogs and babies. And far be it from me to suggest that they would be swayed by being offered $1 million a year by way of salary. But they have been involved in collectively and with the other senior administration in this organisational institutional shift and the reproduction of a basically toxic system of policy making and management. So to change this, is now the big question before us. And I don't think we can expect governments or administrations to do that off their own bat. Pressure is going to be needed, and that pressure will mostly have to come from below. It will come from the participants in the higher education system. It'll come from students. It'll come from more secure academic staff. It will come in a significant measure also from the professional and support staff, the operations staff, the non-academic half of the higher education workforce, many of whom have had as shitty a time as casualised academic staff have had in recent years, many of whose jobs have been outsourced, which means casualised, but also a change of employer. So there are quite a number of groups who have a stake in the system from whom pressure can come. And I recall then the good old slogan, don't agonise, organise. Organising is the task for change, people concerned for change right now. Obviously, the union has to be a very important part of that. No union is perfect, but that's where action in the university sector certainly has to start, and where much of the good discussion of around the future of universities has been happening over the last 5 or 10 years, I think. But don't forget also the other organisations that you have access to, subject organisations, student organisations, organisations outside the university framework too, who might become part of an alliance for change when they can understand the stakes that are involved. I think in trying to create alliances and trying to organise, it is entirely just and fair for people in the casualised workforce to emphasise that the struggle is not in your interests alone. It's also a struggle for a university system that works for the common good, not just for elites, for corporations, and for the privileged part of the staff. What this struggle is for, ultimately, is a viable higher education system and a better model of what universities can be. The assumption of the policy-making classes, so to speak, is, in the good old neoliberal phrase, there is no alternative. But there is alternative. There are alternatives. There are lots of alternatives. I think one of the most exciting thing for me when I was working on the writing of The Good University was going back into the history around the world of universities and discovering the amazing wealth of other forms of university, of experimental universities, anti-colonial universities, democratic universities, student-managed universities, underground universities, incredible stories. They are there. They are part of our real inheritance as university workers. And from them, if nothing else, we can draw inspiration about the possibility of it being otherwise. We still have to come up with practical agendas, of course, in this day and age. I don't think there's a single model for universities that we can say that is the good university or that is the best model. We're going to have a variety of different kinds of universities in the future, I'm sure, and that's a good thing. But they will have some common characteristics. I think there'll be universities which work in the public interest rather than for sectional interests. There'll be universities that work as creative cultural centres multicultural, multi-epistemic, as we now understand they should be. And very importantly, they will be good places to work. They will be institutions that offer respect and care and living wages to all the people who come to work in them. And that, I think, is part of a long-term vision as well as immediate goals of action. So I wish you well in this struggle. I think it's extremely important, and I would be glad to support it however much I can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raewyn, for those fighting words. I agree, we have to start by organising. So it's my pleasure to introduce a brilliant organiser, Dr. Robert Boncardo. Rob is a sessional tutor in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at the University of Sydney and a member of the NTU branch committee. He's going to provide a summary of the meeting today and some thoughts about where we go to from here before a bit of time for questions and discussion. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks very much, Tash. I'll try to be brief so we do get to hear from other people who've been unable to speak so far. I just wanted to briefly bring things back to the permanent staff situation. We've heard a lot about exploitation of casuals, but we know, and we've known it through excellent documentation that permanent staff have themselves put together. I'm thinking about the 2019 workload survey, that permanent staff themselves do significant amounts of unpaid labour. So the survey, for instance, last year, which is still available on the NTU's website, found that there was significant undercounting of teaching preparation duties, undercounting of coordinating duties. There was a poor conceptualisation of the way that service roles were performed and allocated. There was a real misunderstanding of the kind of pressure that in particular teaching intensive staff were under, and the inability for them to be able to do research and therefore to be able to go on to the next stage of their career in a 40-40-20 position. So the issue of casual exploitation, fixed term exploitation, precarious exploitation sits alongside and is part of the very same structure that exploits permanent staff as well. So we really are all in this together. And I think that one way of interpreting what we have seen in these surveys from UNSW and the University of Sydney is to see that the incredible amounts of invisible unpaid labour that is currently being done by casual staff, if casuals are let go next semester at Sydney University, that unpaid labour will fall onto the shoulders of permanent staff and will increase this enormous amount of unpaid labour, invisible work that they are already doing, to the point of breaking point, to the point where I think people will be unable to cope and will not be able to provide the same sort of education that we normally strive to do, and their own careers will be in jeopardy. And this was the main reason that we advanced last week in the wake of the Dean's Who's Zooming Who session, where she spoke about the possibility of redundancies occurring if casuals weren't fired. But we're saying that in fact the likelihood of redundancies is higher if they get rid of casuals because of this overloading of unpaid work and invisible labour onto the shoulders of permanent staff, leading to a reduction in the quality of what goes on here at Sydney University. But the second reason that I think is even perhaps more important for why we hope from here on casual staff and permanent staff at Sydney in particular can continue to work together. And just to say, our goal at the Casuals Network is to put the units of study back on next semester that have been quote unquote rested. We do want our jobs. Many of the casuals here in the meeting today, many of the casuals who've organised this meeting are currently unemployed. So we need to keep that in mind, that our aim here is to get our jobs back, not in 2021 or in 2022, but in second semester 2020. And I think the key thing to understand here is that one reason we really want permanent staff to be on our side and to fight for us, to keep us in our jobs, is that we think that with us in the workplace, you will be able to better set up what Raewyn just spoke about, which is industrial democracy, to be able to work with us together to have some kind of say within our faculty and within our institution in particular. And on the horizon next year is, of course, the enterprise bargaining round. And the thing that you want within enterprise bargaining rounds is you want a group of organised, militant, committed, passionate, principled people in the workplace to help you rally and to make sure that we don't see the biggest backflip or backsliding which I think we risk seeing because of the current austerity conditions. So you need to keep us in your workplace if you want to make your workplace the kind of place which could have the dreams of industrial democracy that Raewyn articulated. And the first step to do towards doing that is to come to our organising meeting next Thursday. It's also to fill out the little questionnaire that we've put together, which is to say, are there other areas of excessive and unnecessary expenditure in the faculty that could be cut in lieu of cutting the teaching talent? In one sense, this plays into the idea of austerity, we admit that, but on the other hand, the key thing about this is for permanent staff and precarious staff to organise together to reset the faculty's priorities and to reset them, to once again use a term from Raewyn, from below. So that's all I have to say. So hope to see you next Thursday. Please fill out our questionnaire. Please keep in touch. Please organise with us as we try and build industrial democracy at Sydney University.
Thanks, Rob. That was great. I have some time to take questions now. I understand if people need to leave at 1 p.m, but maybe we can, the rest of us could stay till about 5 past so we can have a bit of a discussion. But if you do need to leave, just remember to put your email address in the chat if you're wanting an invite to the meeting next week. So if people want to click on participants and use the raise hand function, then I can call on anyone who would like to contribute a question or some thoughts. I'll keep an eye out. Okay, so I've got Rosemary. Go ahead.
The fact that if people, you know, coming up towards doing a PhD know that they're not going to be able to get any teaching work or later casual or permanent work, whether they will actually then decide not to do a PhD, which will reduce the income of the faculty and all the other faculties that the arts faculty supports. That's all. As another line of argument. I know it's said in one of your Joel's slides, your slide, somebody's slide, that people doing PhDs were saying they were considering leaving. And this would have quite a significant financial impact.
Definitely. Thanks, Rosemary. I've got Miro.
Yeah, thanks, comrades, for a great meeting. I just wanted to pick up a little bit on what Raewyn mentioned in terms of actually, you know, building the university for the public good and trying to bring in those elements, both in terms of equity for students and for all staff. And I think the struggle that's emerging now against the fee hikes is something that we need to connect to as well. And, you know, we've seen the government trying to basically pit, you know, STEM versus humanities and social sciences as a very clear dividing tactic to deflect from the fact that they're actually reducing government funding overall and increasing student contributions. And I think, you know, the Vice Chancellors work hand in glove with various governments that have sought to defund universities, and they operate as the small kind of little dictators that, you know, implement the various cuts that have come from policy. And I think we need to take on that whole politics as a, you know, comprehensively. And that means taking on both the fee hikes and the cuts simultaneously, you know, merging the struggles, actually drawing students and the public on our side to build that kind of fight back. And I think part of what's Kynan mentioned, we've got this National Assembly that we're building towards on August 4th. I really encourage everyone to go out and build that. We're trying to get as many, you know, campuses to turn out to that as possible so that we can have an open discussion about what we're going to do in the second half of the year. Obviously, some of us will not have work. That's something we need to take into account. But for other people that are on campus and you know, do have the opportunity to withdraw our labour, I think we need to start seriously talking about that. And one opportunity that I think will come up is the militant construction union, the CFMEU, has flagged taking action in October as part of their fight against the Liberal government, and seeking to build that campaign. I think we should look to build a solidarity with them, and if they're coming out onto the street and not facing the fines, I think it's going to make it easier for us to convince our colleagues to do the same. So yeah, really encourage people to come out on August 4th, as well as all the other organising that we're doing, and we can continue the discussion there. Thanks again.
Thanks, Miro. It would be great to have as many people out to the National Assembly on the 4th of August as possible. I don't have any other hands up in the chat, in the participants box. I'll keep an eye on it, although I do love to conclude a meeting on time. That makes me very happy. Okay, yep, Ken, go ahead.
Thank you. Since nobody else is going on, I just wanted to say that on the question of withdrawing labour, it's very difficult to withdraw labour that you don't actually have. If you don't have any work, you can't really go on strike. So this is why this whole movement, and really our whole means of putting pressure on management and on the broader community to restructure universities, really relies on permanent staff or ongoing staff to join in with any kind of significant action. So obviously we have to get as many people who actually have labour that they can withdraw to join with us in that campaign, let's say. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Bronwyn?
Yeah, hello. Oh, excuse me, frog in my throat. Hello, Raewyn, Dany, everyone who spoke. Thank you all so much. And it's great that the Casuals Network, you leave me in awe, and I've been a Bolshie organizer since with it forever, and you just blow me away. So you're just fabulous. The thing about unprotected industrial action is that
Just gone on mute, Bronwyn.
I don't know how that happened. Sorry, I go to sort of unclick my hand and it ends up muting for some peculiar reason. Anyway, I think it's a great idea. I think we should do it. I'm all in favor of unprotected industrial action. I agree with the comments in the chats that it's unprotected industrial action that has got us places in the past. However, to take unprotected industrial action, we have to be sure that we're going to have a groundswell of people prepared to do that, and that we protect the people who are going to be the most vulnerable. Now, that is not a straightforward thing to do. I don't think we have the groundswell of, sort of, let's get warm this winter and riot type of feeling in our faculty. There are quite a lot of yes people in our faculty, or people who are intimidated or, cautious about taking action or won't for whatever reason, yeah? So I think we really need to think very carefully about, if we do take unprotected industrial action, who takes it, what form does it take, and how sure we can be that people are actually going to pledge to do it. So I'm really happy to work on that, but there needs to be a whole bunch of us working on that, and people at my level of appointment need to be doing it too.
Thanks, Bronwyn. I think the meeting next week at the University of Sydney is going to be a great place to continue having these discussions. We do have our work cut out for us, but I guess we have no choice at this point but to fight. So yeah, thank you very much for that perspective. I don't have any other hands up. I just wanted to thank all of our speakers again for their wonderful presentations. It's been great to hear from you all and have such a great discussion in the chat as well. And thanks everyone for coming along. Again, finally, just leave your email if you're a permanent staff member, preferably your private email, not your work email, so that we can contact you. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming today.
Thank you, everyone. So excellently chaired.
Yes, thanks, Tash, for chairing that meeting. It was marvellous. Well done.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, everyone.